The papacy is the dividing issue between Protestants, Orthodox, and Catholic Christians. And this week on the show, I am joined by Erick Ybarra, who began as a Reformed Baptist, journeyed into the Anglican Church, and began asking on that journey questions of authority. How could the interpretations of the Bible that he was hearing from different denominations, from the pulpit in different places, make sense? There are differing opinions. Where was the seat, ultimately, of authority in the Christian church? Well, this week, Erick shares with us the fruits of 10 years of study looking at the papacy. He's written a fantastic 800-page book on the subject and unpacks that here today with us. Questions of the origin of the papacy, how is it understood throughout history, questions of infallibility, what changed at Vatican I, are the Catholic Church out of line in the idea of having a pope as the seat of authority, and how do we as Catholics understand that position vis-a-vis the Orthodox Christians whose liturgy, whose belief systems, whose theology looks very similar, and then the Anglicans, Protestant Christians, Baptist, Reformed Christians from Erick's background as well, everything in between. This is a fantastic, deep dive into the history of the papacy. I hope you love it. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the bell, subscribe to the channel, do all those fun things. Leave some comments down below. Keep it nice, keep it PG, and thanks for watching there. If you're listening on podcast, thank you. Please follow this show wherever you find it and leave a rating or review if you can, because those ratings and reviews help to push the podcast out to new listeners and grow and expand the mission and mandate of this show, what we're doing here. We're in for an awesome time this week. I am joined actually by the cordial Catholic, by Erick Ybarra. He is, I think, the nicest guy that I know. He's a convert to the Catholic faith. He's the author of a number of fantastic books, growing day by day, Erick. Melchizedek and the Last Supper, the Philoque, the Papacy, the just shall live by faith, and the Church Fathers on rebaptism. A fantastic spread of books, Erick. He lives with his 6 sons in Orlando and wife in Orlando, Florida. And we're talking about his newest book, The Papacy, out from Emmaus Academic. Is that right?
Well, they have 2 publishing wings.
They do, and I get confused sometimes.
I get confused with them too. So it's ERP, Emmaus Road Publishing, is technically where my book.
That's
the books that they market towards seminaries is through Emmaus Academic, and my book landed in just general audience rather than seminary. So that's fantastic. Your enormous, nearly 800-page book on the papacy. Congrats on that. And hey, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here, Erick. Thank you, Keith. I'm happy to be back, and I appreciate your welcome back. And it's just a blessing and gift to be here. And thank you for giving me a table to share with you.
Well, I'm very happy to have you back. I said before, just now, I think you are the cordial Catholic. This is the name of my show, Erick. But I swear, I mean, if I think of a guy who is cordial, who's out there defending the Catholic faith charitably, ironically, thoughtfully, kindly, it's always you, Erick, time and again. And I see your interactions on Facebook and different places, on YouTube, on your blog, and I see guys attack you sometimes very crudely, very personally, very rudely. And I see you respond time and again in thoughtful kindness, Erick. So keep fighting that good fight, man. I don't know how you do it some days, but congrats on representing the Catholic faith as charity and such so well, Erick.
Yeah, I think I've been extended so much grace and mercy in my own life, and I mean, my own wife is just she's like the greatest saint I know. And my wife and my kids, they're very merciful to me in my task of parenting, and I've just I had my days of retaliation, and I did it on Facebook. There are people who know me from back in the day where I could be, and then there's probably some time in the last year or so where I've probably let somebody have it. So I'm not innocent, in the when you look at the full breadth of my life. But I do know that a lot of these people on the other end of the screen, they're eternal souls.
Yeah.
And
right.
It's so easy for people to fly off the handle. Look, when you're driving on the road, people flip each other off and say evil things on the road because they know they're not going to have to stand in front of them. Well, it's just like that on the internet, just even more so. So I just say, you know what, this person, if this person's going to get me angry and I'm going to display wrath on the internet, they're actually going to possess more control over me in their faraway distance, where I'll never know where they are. I'll never have the opportunity to confront them, So why not just take the opportunity to be perhaps a link in the chain of that story that helps that person, and so it helps to think that way. People have done it to me quite a bit, so that I'm returning the favor.
You're a great guy, Erick. I can't stand you. You're too. Why aren't you living in Canada? You're too Canadian, Erick, to be down there in Florida.
Yeah, I'm from Miami Beach, so I was actually from a pretty rough area.
Yeah.
And I've had my run-ins, and but being a father has really impacted me a lot, and trying to be a good husband, has been, it takes a lot of time and effort. But most of all, I think that it's just part of the ministry. It's if we lose it and if we get angry, then even if we're right, even if we are like very compelling in our argumentation, just the fact that we're going to let somebody down in that way, we might as well have lost. So if I'm going to take the time to be in this business of defending the Catholic faith, I could do it perfectly and lose everything if we do it in a way that makes this out to be like a blood sport,
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Now, you've produced an 800-page book on the papacy, and there are lots of ways we could tackle this, and lots of ways we have on this show and on the internet, on YouTube, and debates and discussions and blogs and other books that defend the papacy on all kinds of different angles. And you in particular here are tackling the papacy in terms of the East and the West, in terms of the Orthodox Catholic kind of debate. And I'm curious to begin with, Erick, why? Like, you obviously did an absolute ton of research. I think this was like a 10-year project for you, and this is an enormous project. This is a huge, mammoth book, and your sources are, gosh, I don't know. You've dug this so deep, I can't even fathom this project, the scope of this, Erick, honestly. And readers should just see the size of this book to understand and appreciate the scope of the table of contents alone. It's enormous, and the font is tiny, which allows you to pack more detail in there. So this must have been for you a project of some kind, and must have come from somewhere. You're a convert to the Catholic faith, as I am, and I know for me, I didn't have, say, a stopover, but I didn't go to or become Orthodox and began attending an Orthodox liturgy or anything. But for me, as I was moving towards the Catholic faith, asking questions of authority, the papacy, who held the seat of understanding and unpacking what we believe and how we act as Christians, I did a dive into the Orthodox faith and looked at the claims of authority in the Orthodox faith versus the Catholic faith, trying to understand where to land for myself. I actually had friends who were Orthodox, so for me that was more of a natural first kind of stop, is to look at the Orthodox Church and say, okay, well these guys, my friends here, this compelled them. What in here? And for me, it was the issue of authority in the Orthodox Church that drew me to keep going towards the Catholic faith, because I couldn't figure out, not even looking at the sources in any depth like you've done in any such imagination. I looked at some cursory historical sources and some theology, but even practically for me, I found that I couldn't understand how it would work any different than my current Protestant faith in terms of ultimate authority in the Orthodox Church. And so I kept kind of going and found the papacy and found a home in there that made logical sense, and then obviously theological and historical sense as well. What was the genesis for you in this journey, though? What began this mammoth project of yours? It must have began somewhere for some reason on your journey. Where was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. So, the documentary evidence in this book probably comprises 10 plus years of research. But the genesis of this was, I was a Reformed Baptist for many years. I was one of those guys that would be preaching the Bible on the campus over here at the university in Central Florida. And I wonder how many people see me nowadays. I mean, I was like very thin back then, so I don't think they'd recognize me now. But I went from that to sitting down with Lutherans. I wanted to move more closer to a traditional Christianity. I was looking for kind of like what Newman and the Tractarians were trying to do in the Oxford movement, which was, where can we find the absolutization of the Christian faith? Right? Where is it certain? Where is it absolute and not subject to so much reinvention? And with the Lutheran Church, I found, well, I'm not going to go to the Catholic Church because I thought they were kind of like what gets presented today by a lot of the Protestant apologists, where there was a very pure ship that set sail from the dock at the beginning, but after 1,500 years, all these barnacles came on, all these accretions came on, and it was important to get rid of those by the Reformation. So Lutherans were, compelling to me for a while, but then I kept researching history and I couldn't get away from the monoepiscopacy and the Eucharistic sacrifice. And so I found a very strange home, and it was cozy while I was there in the Anglo-Catholic world, Anglican Church. And while I was there, I felt like I could be there for the rest of my life. But being so deep in the study that I didn't want to just stop. So I just kept reading and reading and reading. And I noticed that my own Anglo-Catholic parish, even though I could, materially speaking, point to history to prove that us Anglo-Catholics were doing a lot of what the church fathers did, I found other elements that was not how the church fathers thought. And in particular, it was not the issue of ecclesiology and the visible oneness of ecclesiology, because I was part of the APA, the Anglican province of America on the East Coast under Bishop Grundorf. We were a break off of a break off of a break off. Part of the, for the listeners who aren't familiar, part of the continuum of the Anglicans, the traditional continuum. We broke off from Canterbury when Canterbury started to go liberal with the acceptance of females into the priesthood, and also speculative acceptance and toleration of perhaps new ways to understand same-sex relationships. And so the church, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, stood circled around Canterbury, which kind of went south in the liberal direction. And then you had the Episcopal Church that kind of went in a similar direction in the States. And then from there, you have all these breakup parts that are trying to go back to the original traditional Anglicanism. And we maybe had like 10 or 15 parishes up the coast of the East. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what do I think about the Catholics and the Orthodox? My instinction is to say that they're part of the church as well, but the church fathers didn't allow for that kind of what's called a branch theory, and not just kind of like temporary branch theory. Like this could be 1,000-year long, 2,000-year long branch theory. So kind of like a permanent schism ecclesiology, as if it's okay to be that way. And that's when I said, no, this is brand new. This is not what the fathers taught. It doesn't seem to be what the scriptures teach either. So that's when I knew, all right, I'm going to actually have to step into the frightening zone of either the East or the West in the historic sense. And that put me at the fork between Byzantium and Rome. And that was before I learned about the other schisms, the Egyptian, Syrian, Miaphysite, and the Assyrian Church of the East. But the fork between Byzantium and Rome is really what gripped me. And I knew that I made a promise to God that I would not make a flippant decision about it. And even when I did make the decision about it, this is going back to like 2012, towards the end of the year, I said, I will not let this subject go until I have satisfactorily studied it very, very well, even after becoming Catholic. So I just continued to hit the books, writing articles. I made my own blog. My blog seems to be centered around the whole East-West Latin Byzantine discussion, although I do talk about Protestantism in many ways sometimes. So that's where the interest started. Where the genesis of the book came in is when I started to forget a lot of the things I learned. And I thought to myself, whoa, I don't want this to just come into my mind and leave through my withering memory. And so I said, there needs to be a way to document it. So that's where the genesis of the book came in. So this is my investigation of the East versus West debate, specifically on the papal primacy. And because I think that's really the what, at the end of the day, what makes the difference between the two nowadays. The filioque and, purgatory, zymes, those things are definitely doctrinal. They're essential. But it seems what we've learned is that the papacy, we keep coming back to that issue as fundamental. And as you know, Joe Heschmeyer has made it clear, the papacy is really what it comes down to. If that's true, then Catholicism is true. Because if you prove the filioque true, well, that's the Protestants believe the filioque. So I did treat the filioque eventually, but only after treating on the papal primacy. So that's the genesis of this book.
Yeah, there's a book on that too that you produced.
Yeah.
So 800 pages in very tiny font, tackling this subject. We are the benefactors of your thoroughness and your investigation, Erick. So thank you for that. And I think that's phenomenal. I mean, that's an amazing journey. And I think you're spot on that's the claim, that the papacy, right? That's the claim that it boils down to. You can get the other things out of the way and deal with those things, but you're ultimately left with, well, yeah, where does the actual authority lie? And for me, my understanding of the Orthodox Church when I was on my journey was to look at the church and go, okay, so these churches were kind of together. There's this schism over where the authority lay. Who had the authority to maybe change the creed or whatever, but ultimately it was a schism about the authority and where that lay. But that's not, I don't think, because you talk about the papacy far, far back before the schism between East and West. Yeah. There's much more to talk about in there. So where, I guess that my question would be, the roots of the opposition to the papacy, or the roots of this kind of dissension. Where does this really begin between East and West? Like, where does that boiling point start to boil before it finally erupts, in 1054, in air quotes?
Sure.
Where does it begin?
That is such a great question, and I tackle it, but it's kind of a complex question and requires complexity in the answer. But I'm going to make this as short as I can. Eastern and Western Christians up to about the 9th, 10th century thought that there had been the one undivided church of the first millennium between East and West, the Greeks and the Latins. And once the schism hit between Constantinople and Rome in 1054, which is more of like a symbolic date, Christians on both sides were still thinking that we were relatively in communion with one another, because the other Eastern patriarchates didn't follow Constantinople in removing the Pope from the diptychs of divine liturgy for some years. So it took a while for the schism to really, there was a brewing process, you could say, or an incubational period where it was steady, the markers were set up, enough of the material was sufficient to break the two churches in half, but it still took a while for formality to sink in. Definitely by the sack of Constantinople, 1204, and most certainly by the rejection of the Council of Florence at the end of the 15th century is solidified the separation of the two churches. But by and large, many scholars, historians, up to the modern era even spoke of the one church of the first millennium up until the schism started, the snowball rolling around 1054-ish. But increasingly in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, historians are finding the material for the schism back into the early centuries that was already embedded into East and West, dividing the two conceptually, but there was no cognition of it to really make a schism until much later. And so you've got historians and theologians today that speak about an incognito schism that was already forming between the Greeks and the Latins. So almost, I mean, I've seen some scholars say that it already started back in the 2nd century. I don't go that far. So a lot of them say the 4th century, where Rome starts to make mandates and starts writing decretals, decrees, papal decretals to the east, to the west, in the same format that the Caesar Augustus used to write to the imperial provinces, and the East is said to be more of a collegial, more of a, where the bishops are all equal and it's unanimity which wins the day, whereas the Roman West is more papal, and so at the end of the day, it's what the Pope decrees. And so I still think that's too neat of a division too, but it passes. It's today. It's what passes for scholarship today. So if you introduce something different than that, you're going to have to do the scholarly work and trying to prove otherwise. Where I land on it is I don't think we can say there was already a schism there, but I think we can start to see a difference in paradigms, and we see it in action. It's not something that we have to speculate on. We don't have to speculate. We definitely see it in action in some of the ecumenical councils where the Pope is enforcing something, and then there are Greeks who think that he doesn't have any authority to do that. So we can't say that both sides were always on the same page. But what I have found is that the Eastern churches did end up accepting the papal claims when they thought it was the opportunity was there for orthodoxy to win. So if they were combating monothelitism, Arianism, or the Christological errors of Nestorius or Eutychius, they definitely allowed Rome to make her claims, and they definitely made use of those claims. But where they grounded that, was it in the fact that Rome was the imperial city in antiquity? Was it because the canons created that kind of a position for her? Or was it this divine institution from the mouth of Christ to Peter? And you see Easterners choosing from the three differently at different times. I think you've got a very good portion of significant saints, doctors, and councils in the East that fall in that category, where it's a divine institution created by Christ for Peter's successors until the end of time. But you do have the other ones, where when they go against Rome, their rationale is, well, this is a canonical thing, so we can go against it if he goes against the faith. Rome had its stature from the imperial city, but Constantinople's now new Rome, so maybe the emperor is the one that has the final authority. But what we see is the one side that was always consistent and never budged was Rome's position on the matter, which was her duty to pastor the universal church didn't come from a lust for power. It didn't come from a usurpation of authority that they had to seize, but rather it was an obligation that was put on top of them by the Lord Jesus Christ in Blessed Peter, because of his cathedra, or his throne, stationed in the Roman Church.
Yeah, well said. Good answer to a complex question. Well done, sir. Now, obviously, at the end of the study, you've become Catholic, and so the evidence in this book would obviously lean towards that conclusion that Rome was right on the papacy, and you really do this incredible dive into history throughout all the ages, right from the beginning of the church forward, and looking at the evidence for the papacy, as opposed to evidence for there not being not being the foundation of authority in the church to respond to that Orthodox claim. And of course, I mean, this evidence could equally be used against, say, a Protestant claim of no papacy, because it's evidence that I think shows a papacy from throughout history, right? You're tracing out the evidence for the papacy.
Right.
Where, I guess my question would be, looking at, scripture is one thing. You cover that in this book, in a chapter. And then you go methodically throughout the ages, looking at the evidence in each and every corner of the historical world.
The four corners of the world.
Yeah, as it were. So, I mean, maybe take us through some highlights. Maybe I guess I'm looking at the first evidence, because it wasn't as if, again, I guess maybe you should answer this first. It wasn't as if the papacy, and this is maybe sorry for all the asides here, Eric, but
no worries.
This, I guess, is sometimes the claim of YouTube apologists or critics or debaters that, look, there's no just clear bang out evidence from scripture that we have that says, here's the papacy, here are its limits, here's how it works, ergo there's no papacy, right? Or there's not good enough evidence for it. You tackle scripture, and then you continue to show us how, well, yeah, the Roman church, the church in Rome, saw itself as this throughout all of time. And so you build, whether or not a debater could see that in scripture, you're building up the evidence to say, well, look, this is how the church thought itself to be, right, based on what it heard Jesus say. So that's pretty good evidence. Do you... I've lost, and of course, all the I've lost my question now, Eric. But
yeah, I know, I'm tracking with you.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. I wonder though. Then, what would you say about kind of the foundation of the papacy? It wasn't as if, and we don't argue this as Catholics, that it was established from Scripture in this nice, neat and tidy thing that then goes forward throughout all of time, right? There isn't like this papal manual in Scripture that we as Catholics say, okay, here it is, and this just kind of marches forward, right?
Yeah.
That's not how it is. So how do you treat that evidence for the papacy from the beginning and then going on? Because, right, the critique often is, well, it's not here and therefore it doesn't exist. But you have 800 pages of something here, Eric. So.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to look at this and make a good analysis with it. So yeah, it's not like the Old Testament where God, took Moses to the mountain and told him every last instruction for how the tabernacle was to be built, what room was going to be for what objects are going to be for what, and what the priests will be and what the sons of Aaron will do. And that would have been nice, but the New Testament doesn't have that. What we have coming out of the New Testament is an apostolic mission that's centered in Jerusalem. As far as they know, Christ is returning very soon, so they weren't making geopolitical plans for how the church is going to outreach all, past Rome. I mean, for them, that was the ends of the earth. And so it was kind of an accident that of the persecutions that moved them from Jerusalem to Antioch. You read this from the Chronicle of St. Luke and the Acts of the Apostles. So they developed the Antiochian mission, and from there, Christians are going in the dispersion or the diaspora. And you see church plants, apostles going out and being the progenitors of these mother missions whether it's in Corinth, Ephesus, Thessaly, Philippi, Colossae. They're going to all these major cities in the Roman provinces, and they're planting churches, and they're bringing these sons, like Timothy was the son in the faith for Paul. Titus was a son. Barnabas was a co-worker. You have these co-workers with the apostles. They were called the evangelists, they were not like of the original 12 apostles who saw the Lord, where, Paul's being born out of due time, saw the Lord through the miraculous intervention on the road to Damascus. But you start to see church plants, and then from those church plants, missions being conducted from those major plants. But there was these mother cities like Rome, Antioch, Alexandria in Egypt, and then some of the classical churches in the Asiatic East, Ephesus, Philippi, Smyrna with Polycarp. You get all these churches. Excuse me. What you start to see is that we don't have a lot of documentary evidence. It wasn't as if they were writing a chronicle for 21st century readers. They didn't feel they needed to prepare for something like that. So what we can glean from the small epistolary exchanges in late antiquity, we start to see something quite amazing nonetheless, which is that in order to run this Christian mission worldwide, there needs to be some sort of government. And the apostles knew that. And so we read already in First Clement, is epistle from Clement, could have been written very early. I stick with the 95 AD date. But he gives us one of the first indications that the apostles knew that there was going to be a contest when they die, who's going to take up the appeals. There was an appeal from Paul and Barnabas over the situation of circumcision, right? Well, what they do? They went to Jerusalem. They held a synod. Peter stood up. He spoke. And James concluded. That was the court of appeals, right? Well, what about when the apostles are done? To whom do we appeal for doctrinal, disciplinary problems? And what we see is Rome, the city of Rome, interestingly enough, so not Jerusalem, not Antioch, and nowhere in the East where Christianity originally started breathing. All the way in the West, in Italia, in the Italian peninsula, this Church of Rome is the prima sedis, the first see. What in the world is that? But they don't define it for us because they make passing references about it, Then we get the second see and third see. So there was 3 sees that were leading in the beginning of the early centuries of the church. If issues were compounded in the Far East, the court of the church at Antioch would manage affairs. Sometimes Ephesus took up that role. Jerusalem was coming in to take up a role as well, but Antioch had a preeminence in that area, in Syria. In Egypt, the Church of Alexandria took up affairs, and if issues in all the East would refer to Alexandria. But if issues could not be solved in the Eastern sphere, and they needed to get like a finality, like a final decision, where after that decision was made, there was no more revision or questioning and opening the status of the issue up again. It would be going to Rome, and we don't get a rationale for it right away. They're not saying, oh, by the way, for those later who are going to wonder why we do this, it's because Peter was there. And, they don't say that because they don't feel the need to say that. Right. But we do catch them saying it right around the 3rd century, where there's a dispute over baptism and how to receive people who were baptized in heretical communities. And what we see is Pope St. Stephen making a claim that the divine investment of Christ into Peter, as recorded by St. Matthew 16, verses 16 to 18, that because of that, the Roman cathedra, the Roman episcopal throne, is equipped with a legitimate power to make enforcements on doctrine and discipline. And we already have notations of this happening earlier, right? With Clement to Corinth, Victor towards the Asiatic churches. I'm sure some of your listeners are probably familiar with that whole Quarto-Deciman controversy over the date of the Easter celebration. Pope Victor's already exerting universal jurisdiction in the 180s. But again, we don't have a rationale for it. You see the rationale starting to get explicit with Stephen. Where St. Peter and his primacy is what legitimizes Rome taking responsibility for foreign disputes that are not nowhere near the enclosure of Italy, but they're taking place far away. And once we move into the 4th century, the documents, especially when Christians they come out of the shadow of persecution, and Christians are growing, especially when you get the imperial Greeks, the people of the empire that were not Christians, converting to Christianity and keeping some of their noble statuses, like the family of St. Ambrose, for example. You start to see the literature pop up, and now we have more to read. And here's where you start to see this idea that Christ wanted to build an apostolic college to govern the church, and that when the apostles came to their end, their successors would take their office, like Clement said, but within that collegial structure, there was a hierarchy, the apex of which is St. Peter's station, where he died as martyr in the Church of Rome. And so that's really where things begin. And the question is Christ leading his church, or did he leave the church to be tyrannized by human opinion? Or does he have a plan with it? And the early Christians are all conscious that the Holy Spirit is entrusted with this mission of vivifying the church until the end of time. And it's just the majority of the evidence points in the direction of this is what the Lord, this is what he did. All of the true doctrines, not the Montanists, not the Gnostics, not the Novatianists, not the Ebionites, all those other competitors, but the one Catholic Church, for now, let's just say small c, the Catholic churches that saw Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch as the chief sees, that's the Catholic Church. That's the Church of the Creed, the Unum Sanctum. So, Protestants might look at this and, they're going to have to ask, if our Lord Jesus Christ gave so much attention and effort to make the apostles infallible in their writings and in their oral preaching, in order to benefit the church, why is it that would retire when the church needs it the most, namely when the apostles pass away? So those are some epistemic, philosophical, prolegomena questions. But my main audience is really the Orthodox. The book is subtitled "Revisiting the Debate Between Catholics and Orthodox," and that makes it much easier because the Orthodox share the heritage with us for the first 10 centuries.
Yeah.
So if I was writing it for Protestants, I probably would have to, take a different angle. But I think a Protestant could read it and definitely find strong, compelling, because a lot of Protestants are thinking. I was just reading a Protestant book the other day by somebody who is, otherwise a famous scholar, and his name won't be mentioned. But the way he was talking about the papacy is like he thought that this was invented like in the 12th, 13th century. I'm thinking to myself, there's just no way he could be that familiar with early Christianity, having spoken like that. So I definitely think that Protestants across the spectrum could benefit from reading it.
Yeah. But the shared heritage with the Orthodox, there's already that groundwork laid there, right? It's just a question of where to put that authority. And I think one of the objections, is so, all right, so I don't see this explicitly in Scripture. So this is one of those accretions that Roman Catholics slowly accreted or kind of what's the word? Brought power to themselves, ushered in power unto themselves as this developed. It's not in Scripture. From the beginning, it's unclear, and so we can call this an accretion that just grows and grows and grows and grows. And this is one of those indicators of the Roman Church, the things that the Romans do, right? Is just to center power under ourselves. So you go through and kind of trace out these claims throughout history to say, no, well, look, this was understood here and here and here and here. This, is it fair to say, developed, right? And I guess, is that wrong that those kind of things might develop?
Yeah. So now we're getting into an issue, and this is the topic of the development of doctrine, which this is like one of those things. It's one of the most misunderstood ideas that you see, and what's interesting is that if there's any doctrinal camp in contemporary Christian society that should be beholden to this concept and rely upon it and depend upon it the most, it's definitely the Protestant and evangelical world, because their whole idea is that the church went in diverse ways, some wrong, some heretical, some wrong, but not that wrong, that it was completely destroyed until you get to the Reformation. And then the Reformation opened up, like what Dr. Gavin Ortlund calls the retrieval, reform and renewal by retrieving the older traditions. John Calvin said, we just want to go back to the purity of the 4th century. Well, that's all development. That's all a development. You can't avoid it. If you're a Protestant, you're doing development of doctrine. If you're an Orthodox, you're doing development of doctrine. If you're a Catholic, you're doing development. That's one of the points that Newman was trying to make in his introduction to the essay, which is that the development of Christian doctrine is a natural fact to be observed by its nature. It's not something that because what some Orthodox and Protestants do is they see this as a way of, the Catholics they're admitting that they have no connection to the early church. So what they do is they come up with this glue that is supposed to stick the Grand Canyon cliffs together, and they call it the development of doctrine. And we all know it's just illegitimate. You can't close the gap. So they come up with some, it's just the development. You just pull a rabbit out of the hat, and it's such a terrible, terrible misrepresentation of what John Henry Newman, as just one of the voices who testifies to this observation. You've got people all the way back to the 5th century that are already talking about the idea of doctrinal development. So we get that in St. Vincent de Lérins. So I won't belabor on how to legitimate the theory or the fact of development, but what you see in early Christianity is definitely this fact that you have this idea. There's the one church, there's the faith that was delivered to the saints once for all. It has to be protected. The episcopal officers are the chief guardians of that faith. And then within that, there's a further hierarchical apex at the apostolic see, as it was called. It began to be called the apostolic see, the final court on doctrine and discipline. And so you start to make deductions that are not they're not foreign to the primitive idea. They're simply the primitive idea thought of more carefully as applied as through time and through the traffic of human economy and questioning, and these are things that may not be known explicitly the time that the primitive idea was given, but it's definitely known as that primitive idea goes through time and through the economy of humanity and history. And so you get some of these deductions like, well, if the final court of appeals is Rome and there's no court above that, well, then the apostolic see cannot become a source of poison for the entire church, because if that were the case, where do we appeal? Then that now we're off to the caves and to hide under trees and form our own little schisms, So this was one of those natural developments that coincided with the scripture, because the Christ, when they started to defend papal infallibility in the early centuries of the church, the way they did it was they cited Luke 23, where St. Peter denied the Lord 3 times. It was predicted he would, and then Christ said, "But I have prayed for you that when you are converted, you would strengthen the brethren." They took that as a typological prayer for all of St. Peter's successors. So they were rooting it in Scripture, but they were also taking some of these these philosophical questions as I just described. What's the chief voice of the in doctrine? Well, it's Scripture coinciding with human reason, and so that's one of the ways development worked in that regard. But there's so many other ways it did as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned infallibility, and that's of course the big deal, right? That okay, so there might be a seat in the church in Rome might be very important. And you see different places appealing to Rome, and you see that kind of growing and that becoming more codified and more established and more authority kind of coming underneath there and underpinning that. But then suddenly you tack on this idea of infallibility. And right, the criticism is, well, that's again an accretion, something that Rome has added on that didn't exist in Scripture and that didn't exist in the early church. We don't see in the early church these, a guy called a pope who's saying this is what I infallibly dictate for you to follow, in some kind of formulaic way. This was an accretion that Catholics just kind of developed.
Yeah.
Over time. But
right.
Again, you're tracing out the papacy throughout time. So what did you find as you began to look at that in terms of this really, this quite serious, court of last appeal, infallible place to appeal to? What did you begin to find that convinced you that the Catholic claim was, to this infallible office, the papacy was where to put your hat, to hang your hat?
Yeah. There's many reasons, but I could give you one of the most important ones, and it's this. It wasn't the beauty of the papacy. That's not what drew me. What drew me was, if I was going to deny the papacy, what do I have left? Okay, so I came at it from that angle. So you've got your Protestants and your Orthodox, and they see this highfalutin papacy develop in the Middle Ages, 800s, 900s. You've got these, wild Roman pontiffs making these, grandiose claims. And okay, so what do we do then? Well, that's just a development. That's at the long end of a gradual development. All right, so let's accept that on the table. That's a fact. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just say that happened. Okay, where do we go now? What does our compass say to do now? Well, okay, it was a development. All right, so let's rewind then, right? Because we can fix this development by just turning the clock back, right? that should be the way, right? So when you turn the clock back and you still see facts that are only commensurate with what we're calling that crazy development. There's like when you're turning back the hour hand and you keep going, and you're looking for that purity. You're looking for that purity where there's no papacy, there's no claim to jurisdiction. And I don't find anything that's not commensurate with the development. And so for me, when that happens, if I'm going to take the development thesis as a proof of illegitimacy, then it's kind of like taking all of my options off the table. And now I don't have a Christian option anymore. I don't have an option for the Church of Jesus Christ. Now I have the historical story of what the Bible says, but I don't have anything tangible to really go to myself in where I'm living in the 21st century. I guess we could recreate the faith, and that's we could do that, but you're going to with human inquiry, we're going to wonder where are we getting the right to do these things. And so if I could go back in time and set the hook on there's the purity before it got bad, then I would say, all right, let's go that route. Let's see if there's something there. And with all honesty, I kind of wanted to see that alternative, but I just didn't. And so that's one of the main reasons why I stuck with this age-old tale of the papacy.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. And of course, the criticism, I think, from people in Protestant and Orthodox camps would be, say, okay, so there may have been the primacy of Rome. We see this through history, but Vatican I just doubled down on this in a way that wasn't appropriate, right? Vatican I broke somehow from tradition and just flat out kind of to put the cards down. And from there's no going back now. Like,
right.
There's no, right? How do you respond to a claim like that? I mean, I think your answer is we'll look at history, because you've traced out the history that this was not an audacious claim when it was made, right? But what do you say to something like that? Someone that says this was when Rome put down the cards. There's no going back, and they didn't have the right to do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is a very famous claim, and you hear it from Protestant scholars, Orthodox scholars, and even some dissident Catholic scholars. Names won't be mentioned once again, but they say, well, yeah, they realize they can't get rid of this thing of the Roman primacy, right? So they're going to have to figure out how they can be a team player with it, at least up until a certain point. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, yeah, Rome had primacy. Yeah, but Roman primacy, the final court of appeal, is one thing, but Vatican I is something completely different. And so what they'll do is they'll make that like a dichotomic contrast between the acceptable version of Roman primacy, but the Vatican I primacy is like a completely different animal. And so that's the way to put the game over to this whole thing about the papacy. So there's a couple things I'd say to this, okay? The first thing I would say to this is this. All right, so let's say Vatican I is too far. So let's turn it down a notch. And we're still at a papacy. Let's turn it down another notch, and we're still at a papacy. I mean, how many notches down do we take it for it to match the Presbyterians or the Anglicans or the Orthodox?
Right.
The Orthodox are the ones that are going to come closest. So let's just deal with that. So what we see in the early centuries of the church are four main things that I think are already there, and they're only commensurate with Vatican I. They're not commensurate with contemporary ideas of ecclesiality amidst the patriarchs of the Orthodox Church. So the idea that Christ, when he established the government of the church in the apostles, he singled out Peter. Okay, so he singled him out for a role of leadership. So that's one thing. Number two, that role of leadership was jurisdictional in nature. It was authoritative in nature. So it was a primacy, a real primacy that was not just one of honor. It's not just one of influence or, a moral example. We're talking about an office that can be acted upon like a colonel over captains, and the captains over the lieutenants, a real hierarchy. And third, that primacy of Peter would not die with him. So once Peter would go to his reward, somebody would assume the same role, and not anybody, but, and this is the fourth point, that it was established permanently in the Roman Church. Okay, and that especially that element of permanency, because you've got Philip Melanchthon, who authored many of the documents in the Book of Concord for Lutherans. They'll say, "Oh yeah, well, the papacy's fine, as long, and it could go away too, So, and they were happy to say that because they could just say it went away, the good version of the papacy. And the same thing with the Orthodox. The good version of the Roman primacy was there for 1,000 years, but then it disappeared. Well, the problem is the early sources have that element of permanency, kind of like the way they speak about the permanency of the episcopate. And no Orthodox is going to be able to dream of a day when they wake up and say, you know what, the episcopal office was great when it helped us. Doesn't help us anymore, so we're going to do something else. They don't do that because they'll say, no, this is of divine DNA. This is etched into the DNA of the church. We can't edit it out. Well, the sources talk about that for the Roman primacy. So even without getting into how maximal the authority is, you still have the Roman primacy etched into the DNA. And so just from, without getting into a one-to-one correspondence with whether, what's the detail of that primacy? Is it immediate? Is it direct? Is it ordinary? Is it universal? Without even going into those questions, the Roman primacy was a divine institution that can't just be canceled. Just like the episcopate can't be canceled, just like the presbytery can't be canceled, just like the Eucharist can't be canceled, the sacraments can't be canceled. These are of divine institution. And so divine irreversibility is a feature of the early Roman primacy. But if that's the case, then it has to exist in every century thereafter. And there's only one ecclesial society today which maintains the perpetuance of it. And that's the church that assembled at Vatican I. So without even going into is it ordinary? Is it all those things? Is it just appellate by appeal only? Or is it universal, direct, ordinary? Without even getting into those things. And I do get into those things, by the way. I don't want to run away from those things. I do address those things in the book. But I'm trying to simplify this just as before we get into the weeds. These are some preliminaries for us to back up and say, well, wait a minute. There's already enough in the early Roman primacy to foretell that there could never be a time when it gets canceled.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. And I think linking that to the episcopacy is, I mean, and talking to our Orthodox brothers and sisters, that's a winning perspective, Eric, because of course they're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, okay, the bishops are all canceled. We don't need those guys anymore. We're fine without those. right? Well, yeah, but follow that logic out. I think that's a great point, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get directly to the evidence of direct, but we could. I mean, the book goes into that, and we'd be here forever.
We would. I want to ask you one last question. It's this: thinking of that person who's on the journey, or who is that Orthodox person, or the person on the journey looking into the Catholic faith, stopping in Orthodoxy to have a look there, see what's going on. Either of those people, I think, are equally served by this answer. What would you say to a person who is there to convince them, as both you and I did, you with 10 years of working 800 pages, me with, well, not quite as much research done, but okay, here I am. Nonetheless, to keep them going to their eye on Rome. Why go further and become Catholic, not stop over in the Orthodox and lay your authority claim, there?
Yeah. So, I have many friends who are Eastern Orthodox, and I don't put undue pressure upon them. If they want to stay Orthodox, I will continue to be a friend to them. I will have my door open to them. But if they have lingering questions, then I'm going to tell them that the sources that we all share, Scripture and tradition, speak about the papacy as one of those things that's essential to the Christian faith. As much as we might not like it, I mean, not every Orthodox is happy with his particular bishop. Sometimes the system really stinks, even as an Orthodox. Bishops do bad things, metropolitans do bad things, patriarchs do bad things, and sometimes these things can last for centuries. And yet they all admit that they can't delete those things. Well, if we could show from the sources, and I would say get yourself a basic library of books. Just, if you want to study this issue, you're going to have to read. It's not one of those things where you can just, put, sodium carbonate with water, mix it up, and then boom, you see the truth. This is kind of like going on a diet or going on, I'm speaking for myself. I'm on a long, painful diet, trying to lose weight. It's going to take work, and you're going to find yourself, being upset that you don't see results very quickly. Well, how bad do you want the truth? So I say you're going to have to do the reading. But if you do the reading, the idea is go to the sources that we both know that Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox both accept are unquestionable. We have no right to question those sources, which is Scripture and tradition, the councils, the church fathers, the doctors, the magisterium. And based upon the rules of those two sources, I would press upon them that you will see the emergence of a clarity for the papacy that rather than some sort of ambiguity that allows for what you see today in the Orthodox Church, where there is definitely a sense of need for administrative unity in the Orthodox Church. And no matter how well the liturgy is celebrated, when you have a violent schism, it just makes that liturgy even more heartbreaking, because now I don't know which of them is going to be the one I can go to. And even right now, you've got a temporary schism between, the Moscow, the Russian Orthodox Church and the Church of Constantinople. And I want to say there's some more that the Patriarch of Moscow just recently erased some other bishops from the diptychs of the divine services of commemoration. And this one's slightly different. It's not like before where there were slight schisms between the Greek patriarchs. This one, I don't think, can be overcome unless they finally resolve this question of authority. And how are they going to resolve that question but by an ecumenical council? That's what many of the hierarchs today are saying. week, and I get the emails from people who have these new articles. The Patriarch of Jerusalem came out and said the only way to resolve the schism between Moscow and Constantinople and the issue with Ukraine and now with the war, which makes things further complicated, is to assemble a pan-Orthodox synod. And there's already been plans, and it came to execution over 100 years for a pan-Orthodox synod in the year 2016 at the Council of Crete. But it only took the unwillingness of 4 autocephalous churches to completely take away the authoritative status of that council. And so I don't want to say that, look, this proves orthodoxy wrong. But what I'm saying is, for those of you who are trying to get introduced to this topic and you're wanting to know what you should look at, get yourself a good number of books. You don't even have to read mine. Just I have a list coming out sooner or later on recommended books. Just read the scholars. Pick up the books of the best scholars who are atheists, who are secular historians. They might be Buddhists. They might be Shintoists. Read history from all angles. Read Protestants, Orthodox, Catholics. Sometimes the Catholic historians is just as good as reading the secular historians. But read and pray, and don't beat yourself up. That's another thing I would say, because I got myself into a real mess at one point, and it was a theodicy issue at that point. Well, Lord, I've been seeking you for so long. I've been praying to you for so long, and the clarity isn't here with me yet. Don't you want me in your will? It seems so counterproductive for so many people to be confused on this issue when it's a matter of salvation. It seems like if you're a good God, you would remove all the smoke from our eyes. It's not that way. It's not that way. God does not move the smoke from everyone's eyes all the time. And for what reason? We don't know. That's why I say it goes right back to a theodicy issue. Job, his friends had all those objective reasons why Job was suffering. Well, it's got to be because of this. It's got to be because of that. It's got to be because of this. They were all wrong. Those were all the natural human intuitions. And then God comes in the end and says, well, I created the heavens and the earth. I have my own reasons for why I allow things, and because of that, we have to focus more on our heart. Are we going where God has made things clear to us? And if you're humble and you're seeking Him with all your heart, you don't have anything to worry about. I firmly believe that. But I'll also say that the direction, I believe firmly, is going to be in the Catholic Church. And so definitely pray and do the hard work. The Proverbs says the truth is like a hidden treasure that you have to fight for. You have to search for wisdom. It's not going to come like a McDonald's Happy Meal.
That's a good analogy for diets and for research into the papacy. That's great, Erick. Erick, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I'd have you every week if I could. You're a fantastic guy to talk to. You got a great mind, done some great research, and I love how you. I mean, you make me mad, Erick, because on Facebook you're always posting things that are like the steel man against your arguments, right? I constantly see you on Facebook posting things. I'm like, Erick, but don't share that. That's too good of an argument against the Catholic faith or against the papacy or against these. But you're honest and genuine in your research, and you're not going to shy away from the tough stuff. So I appreciate so often your perspective on things and how you do your work and your research. So thank you. Thanks for sharing it with us and blessing us with your work and for being here. Where do people, I mean, you have a library of books you've produced now. Where can they go to get this stuff, and where can they go to find more things from you and to follow you as you continue to provide us with the fruits of your labor?
Yeah. So thank you for all those words, by the way. But the Papacy book, I don't have the jacket on here, but it comes with the jacket. This you can get at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. If you just type that in Google, it'll take you to the St. Paul Center, which is where Emmaus Road Publishing has all their books. And if you just type in my name in the browsing library of the website, my book will come up, and you could purchase it there. That's the preference. If not, you can get it on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. All my other books are on Amazon, so you could just type in my name in Amazon, and they'll be there. So that goes for my books, and they're also available in Kindle in case, if you want an ebook version of this. There's definitely one on St. Paul Center, and there's a Kindle version of my other books on Amazon. You could look at my blog, erickybarra.org. And this is where, like Keith had mentioned, this is where I do a lot of my own sort of basic training. And I challenge my own views with my own posts. And I do it, and it almost throws some people off because it's like, well, wait a minute. That kind of sounds like he's leaving us on the note of we're going to maybe have to go somewhere else. No, that's never really what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking, let's let the opposing side shine in all of its valid force, and then respond to it. So that's usually how I look at it. But yeah, it's very strange. I understand it is. But if you're mature enough to go into deep waters like that, go to that blog. That's where I do a lot of my spitballing, theologically, historically, philosophically. You could look at a new website I have. It's called erickybarra.com. And what I have forthcoming there is that's going to be like a main page. It'll have a link page to all of my speaking engagements. And I do plan on having a Patreon sooner or later to do courses, book clubs, Q&As. That's coming in 2023.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Sign me up, Eric. I love it. Thanks for being here, Eric. Once again, always appreciate it. Thanks for the work that you do. Once again, God bless you, and God bless that work you are doing for the church. It's incredible stuff. And you and your family, your 6 boys down there, that sounds busy. I can only imagine, Eric. So thanks for taking the time to do this, and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.